This is Asian Insider, and I'm Nirmal Ghosh. Now, China's President Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China, the CCP, have hitched their legitimacy and credibility to eradicating absolute poverty in China. And these efforts have been huge. Close to 3 million party cadres have been deployed to villages around the country to help poor families. My colleague in China, Danson Cheong, visited an area in Sichuan province where 6,600 residents of one county alone moved to new government-built apartments from remote mountain villages. Of course, President Xi's face is also all over the place. There are slogans exhorting all these relocated people to be grateful to the CCP. At a time of increasing international pressure, some say blowback from overreach as China is more aggressive, all this is also designed to beef up President Xi's image. And on November the 23rd, Guizhou province announced that its last 9 impoverished counties had been lifted out of poverty, and that apparently officially marks the end of absolute poverty in China. Now, Beijing's poverty line is set at an annual income of about 4,000 yuan, or about 15% lower than the World Bank's international standard of 1.90 US dollars a day. To look at this a little more critically, I'm joined today by Professor Yu Xiaohua, who is chair of agricultural economics in developing and transition countries at the University of Göttingen in Germany, and the Straits Times China correspondent, my colleague Danson Cheong in Beijing. Professor Yu, Danson, welcome to Asian Insider. Thank you for making time.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
So, how real is this shift out of poverty, Professor Yu? Is this a case of merely shifting rural poor into urban housing where they still need to be subsidized by other provinces and the government? How sustainable is this? I mean, do they remain poor, albeit they have services, of course, such as schools and healthcare? Could you walk us a little bit through the realities of this, Professor?
Poverty is a really, I would call that is the cancer for human society. So from 2013, China took the very radical political campaign and also try to remove all absolute poverty by 2020, because that's a very important, also ambitious political agenda, particularly after Xi took the position of the Chinese president from 2013. This is a very important political slogan. Chinese central government, also party machine, really had a very strong political pressure on local governments and local officials, all dimensions. They must reach the political goals by 2020. So that is very important gift for the 100-year anniversary for the Communist Party of China. So I also think that even a few years ago, I thought that this political goal will be reached. So a few reasons. One is because China, now the government has a lot of resources could reach that. The second reason, that really Chinese government pushed very hard forward. So it's not a surprise to reach here. So I would say that even the Chinese government had a lot of measures to move people out of poverty.
Danson, you've been on a couple of these trips, I think, and one must clarify that they are, I think, government-sponsored trips, right? So do the people who have been relocated, do they have any agency in the matter of shifting? I mean, shed some light on what the shift is like for them as human beings, because it is a huge cultural shift as well, of course. You've referred to customs of some ethnic groups which the CCP considers backward and so forth. Tell us a little bit about all that.
Well, sure. I think the first thing we have to say is that, like you mentioned, China is going on sort of a publicity kind of blitz now that it's nearing its goal of eradicating poverty. So it's organized a bunch of these visits to some of these poverty alleviation projects. For many of these people, I have to say, it's something, the initiative is something I think that really does improve their lives in a very tangible way. Officials, that I've spoken to always say that it's not when it comes to relocation, it's not something that they impose on villages, on people. But I think for the majority of them, it's something that is I think quite welcomed. We have to remember that for a lot of these people, they might be living in very isolated or remote mountain villages. It's a hard scrabble, isolated life, and coming into these urban communities where they are provided jobs and training, and where their children can go to schools, they have access to running water. It improves lives, I think, in a way that it's very hard for urban people like us to understand. I think there's a tendency to want to romanticize, rustic, rural living. But I think for many of these rural folk, it was a very, very hard life. There are some cultural adjustments that need to be. That I think officials say they need to. They have to spend some effort, trying to help these people. So, for example, things like they have to tell them that you can't just sit anywhere. You have to sit you can't sit on the floor. You have to sit on a chair. You can't spit as and where you want. And there's some sort of cultural practices that they I think some of these Communist Party officials think are backward. Like paying excessive amounts of dowry. And things like that. And I think they try and they say they spend a lot of effort to try and educate some of these rural folk. But I think by and large, a lot of them do welcome this move.
So just a quick follow-up to that, Danson. When you say training and job creation and whatnot, what kind of jobs typically do these people do? What kind of training do they get, and what kind of jobs do they do?
Okay, so it varies. Sometimes, if, for instance, the land that they the old land that they used to farm in their old villages might get collectively sort of rented to an agricultural cooperative, and then they might take this larger plot and farm it more efficiently, grow apples and peppercorns and what have you. And some of these people are employed as to pick crops, plant crops, and things like that. But you also have these sort of job centers and in some of these larger communities that I've seen, where they teach them stuff about how to become nannies or housekeepers, things like that. A lot of these initiatives are focused on women or maybe the older villagers, because a lot of the young men, they end up traveling to other provinces where they work as migrant workers.
Dr. Yu, what happens to areas that are somewhat depopulated as a result of this shift? Do some or a lot of the population remain in rural villages, and is there still sort of rural poverty there? How much more do we have to go to really make a substantial difference in their lives? Or are there some in the villages that are doing okay, perhaps through tourism? Danson has mentioned the famous cliff village, which everybody around the world is familiar with from the pictures on the internet. So tell us a little bit about what happens to these areas after the rural population is relocated. What happens to them?
Of course, the conservation and development always is contradictory. We need to make a trade-off with that. As of course, Danson already mentioned that. So most people welcome this change because really this improves their life and move them from the very maybe in this remote primitive society to a modern society. Of course, they change their cultures and also change their habits, but that is the development. We should keep somehow. Of course, local officials know how to. We should keep some of the good side of these traditional traditions, but still, most of the people welcome these changes. I also conduct a lot of research in many regions for such a poverty reduction projects. At least I would say 99% of the local people in rural areas support that.
real credit for Xi Jinping? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of optics about it, but is this going to be President Xi's showcase achievement? We're talking about a big year next year for China.
Well, yes, I think you're right in pointing out that he's made a big deal of eradicating poverty. Since he came to power, it's been one of his personal signature policies, eradicating poverty. And like you mentioned at the start of this session, he's become, I think, this very visible face of this poverty alleviation effort. Every home that I've been to, I've seen there's a poster of President Xi. He's been very intentional about showing himself as a man of the people, right? Often, portrayed visiting rural villages, inspecting some of these poverty alleviation efforts, saying things like nobody will be left behind. So, he's become this very visible face of this anti-poverty campaign. And I think the result is it's given him a large base of rural support, and also something that Chinese leaders trumpet both domestically and in international summits and conferences. They always say that in the last 40 years, China has lifted some 700 million plus people out of poverty. So it's something that I think has given him quite a bit of credibility and legitimacy.
Dr. Yu, perhaps a last quick closing remark from you, 30 seconds we have left. What is your main takeaway? China appears to have done it. What is your takeaway?
Okay, so I think the most important thing is now China economic grows very fast. So if a normal people, if we are without, you have a normal labor force, you could easily reach this poverty line, 4,000 yuan. For example, in urban areas, so even you do anything, you can easily get 150 yuan per day. So you just work 30 days already over that poverty line. So that's not a problem. The problems in the future, one thing is how to make the project sustainable, to take care of the sickness of and the older people. The second thing is to poverty is not only about the absolute poverty. So solve the absolute problem, just the first step of the poverty alleviation. So in the future, how to solve the relative poverty and make the society more harmonious. So because in China, the inequality is very high, to make society more equal and more harmonized. I think that is the next challenge for the Chinese government, also for the party, and also for President Xi.
Very critical point. Thank you for that. Professor Yu Xiaohua and Danson Cheong, thank you very much for joining us today. Definitely a fascinating and very important story out of China, the elimination of abject poverty. Quite a feat. Do check out Danson Cheong's stories in the Straits Times this weekend. For Asian Insider, I'm Nirmal Ghosh.